Welcome back guys, JimmyJules153 with another Dreams Logic tutorial. Today we'll be going over the Destroyer gadget. You can use the Destroyer to destroy objects that you connect it to. It's extremely useful in general, but it can also be used to massively reduce thermometer usage, and I'll go through that soon. First of all, we've just got a Destroyer stamped to this cube that's plugged into a switch. This Destroyer is just set to all its defaults and we haven't changed anything. You can see that when we activate the Destroyer with the switch, it destroys the block. This will also destroy a group of objects if you stamp it to one, unless you scope in and place it on an object within the group. For the next setup, we've got a cube connected to another one with a joint. And we've got the Destroy Connected Objects option enabled in the tweak menu. If we turn on this switch, you can see that it destroys the object with the Destroyer on it, as well as the object that's connected to it by the joint. For this next example, we've got the same setup, except this time the Destroy Connected Objects option is turned off. When we enable this Destroyer, you can see that it just destroys the object and not anything else connected to it. The Destroyer also has an Object Destroyed output on it, that pulses when the Destroyer activates and destroys an object. We've got this output plugged into a counter to make the signal permanent. And you can see that when the object gets destroyed, the counter gets pulsed and changes the color of the block that it's on. Next up, we've got the affected object output, which is a pretty important one with the Destroyer. You can use this output to affect objects that the Destroyer is not connected to, but there's a bit of a trick to it. If we delete this wire coming out of the output here, and try and grab it and plug it into the cube, it won't let us. I think this might change in the future, but at the moment there's a little workaround. You can make the Destroyer affect an object by placing it on the object. So if you snap the Destroyer to the object and put it down, then if you pick it back up again, it'll still be trying to snap to an object. You can see that it tries to snap to the wall behind the cube as soon as I drag it off. If you press Shift again while you're still holding it, or L1 on the DS4 controller, it'll stop the Destroyer trying to snap to things. Now you can see that we've got this wire connected to the object. This might not seem like it has many uses initially, but there's a huge thermo trick that you can use in certain circumstances that I'll show you at the end. Another example here is we can use the Destroyer with an emitter to emit logic in parts of our games where it's needed, then destroy it when it's done its job. I've got an expensive junk microchip here, with just heaps of calculators on it, and it takes up about 10% of the gameplay thermometer. You can imagine this might be a bit of complex logic that you use to do something when a player is in specific parts of your map. But obviously this is a bit of an extreme example. We've got a Destroyer on this, hooked up to a timer, so that after 5 seconds, the cube will be destroyed and the thermometer will be freed back up. This cube is being emitted by an emitter when the player enters a zone. You can see that when I enter the zone, the cube gets emitted and the thermometer jumps up by 10%. Ignore those little 3% jumps for now, there's another example that I'll show you in a moment that's doing that. When the object gets destroyed again, the thermo frees back up. This way you can have bits of the same logic around when you actually need them to be there, and then destroyed when they're not. You can also do similar things with groups of objects, if you don't need them in the scene anymore. We've got a simple bit of logic over here with a trigger zone over Cody Bear's bakery area. This is hooked up to a counter, so that when the player enters the bakery zone, it'll satisfy one of the conditions for our AND gate. The other condition for the AND gate is when the player is not in the zone anymore. So basically when the player has entered the zone and then has left it again, destroy the scene. When I enter the bakery area, the trigger zone activates the counter and activates one of the ports on our AND gate. Then when we leave it again, the NOT gate satisfies the other condition and the scene gets destroyed. You could also use this logic for rolling stages. I've got an emitter hooked up to emit the bakery at the start of the scene with the timer, then also every time the trigger zone finds another tag to emit a bakery. but I'll show you the trigger zone setup in a moment. I've got the exact same setup as we had over on the other bakery, except we've got a mover moving the level along on the x-axis. There's also a timer to delay the destroyer, so it doesn't get destroyed as soon as the player steps off the scene. We'll start in test mode here, and you can see the scene is moving along and spawning a new bakery at each tag as it rolls past. As we walk off each of the sets, the object gets destroyed. This limits the thermometer usage, so you don't have unnecessary scenes that aren't being seen by the player. This trigger zone is looking for a tag on the sculpt, so it just emits a new bakery each time it reaches the end of the set, so the player can keep walking. Because we know exactly where our tag is going to be, I've made the trigger zone small, because the smaller the trigger zone, the less impact it'll have on the thermometer and the frames per second for your game. I've got one more big thermo tip for this. In Create a Clash, I've been planning on having 10 characters, each with about 7% gameplay thermometer usage, so the characters will take up about 70% of the gameplay thermo. This leaves about 30% for each of the stages. With 10 characters in the level ready to be emitted, that would totally fill the thermometer, and it wouldn't be able to emit the characters for the players to possess. To get around this, if a character isn't picked by any players, I've got the entire emitted object being destroyed. On the left over here, we've got which characters the players have chosen in variables. At the moment, player 1 and player 2 have chosen character 4. The characters are lined up 1 through 4, left to right. Each of these characters has a lot of logic on them for calculating damage and other things, and also for animating the fighting moves. The sparkly things around them are just the effects they emit during moves. On this unpicked player destroyer chip over on the right, I've got a variable modifier to get each of the characters the player has chosen. It then passes the character chosen number to 4 different chips. Each chip has 4 calculators on it, and is checking if player 1, 2, 3, or 4 has chosen a specific character number. So on this character 1 chip, it's checking if any of the players have chosen character 1. If they have not chosen character 1, it'll activate the destroyer to destroy the emitted character completely, as it won't be used during this match. You can see that because no players have chosen character 1, they've both chosen character 4, the destroyer is enabled. You can see the affected object output is plugged into the group of objects for character 1. If we go into the character 4 destroyer chip, you can see that both player 1 and 2 have chosen character 4. The destroyer for this character is turned off because the players have chosen that character, and it won't get destroyed because it will be used during the match. Character 3's destroyer is also enabled because the character wasn't picked by the players. Now I'll show you the reason we need to use the affected object output for this. First of all, we need to understand that an emitted object is considered off. So if we stamp this destroyer directly onto an object that's emitted, it too will be considered off, and it will never be able to turn on, even if we send a signal to the power port. You can see that as soon as we stamp the destroyer to the object, it gets turned off, even though there's a signal going to the power, so it'll never be able to destroy the object. But if we drag the destroyer back off the emitted object, it'll keep the connection to it, and we can enable it again to destroy the object. This is only applicable when destroying objects that are emitted. I'll turn on the thermometer here, and you can see the gameplay thermo is at 30%. But when we play the scene, and the 2 characters are emitted with all of that logic on them for the players to possess, the 3 characters that weren't chosen also get destroyed, and the gameplay thermo drops to 25%. If we make player 2 choose character 3, it'll keep 2 different characters on the screen, and the thermo increases to 28% because there's more character models on the screen. With this setup, I'll be able to totally fill up the different maps with characters, and the gameplay thermometer will start out at 100% for a frame at the start of the scene, but once the unused character models get destroyed, the thermo will be at a maximum of 58%, with 30% being taken up by the level, and 28% being taken up by each of the 4 characters at 7% thermo usage. This 58% maximum will only go down if more than one player chooses the same character, or if there's less than 4 players in the game. This allows you to have lots of different characters available, but still have smooth frame rates in your games. That's all for this one, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.